Ethics and Society, Making Ethical Arguments, Part 1. And I'm Professor Kravitz, and just want to point out on this front page here that we have an old photograph from May 9th, 1910. It was taken by Lewis Hine in St. Louis. And these were newsies, young boys who and girls who ran around town and sold newspapers. And here's a few of them smoking. And we're gonna talk about smoking over these series of videos and ask the ethical questions. You know, is smoking morally wrong? And is it morally right to ban smoking? All right, so this is something we're going to keep coming back to. All right, well, let's get the show started.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, time for the show. Once again, thank you for coming to our theater tonight. Have an enjoyable evening. The refreshment stand will remain open for a short time. Still plenty of time to get a snack or cold drink. We'll make an announcement before the stand closes to give you plenty of time to get that last-minute treat.
All right, well, run in the kitchen, pause, and get all your snacks set up. So this is about making ethical arguments. And this part one, I'm going to move pretty fast, and it's really just about arguments in general. So it's I don't think it's as important for an ethics class as the other videos, but we need to set the stage. We need to give some context. Arguments are very important in philosophy, and the word argument's used a little bit differently in philosophy than in other places. So generally, someone who's argumentative is someone who is a problem. But in philosophy, arguments are prized, and we try to make good arguments, and we try to listen to other people's arguments. So it's not about having an argument. It's not about fighting. It's really, in philosophy, it's part of a process of trying to see what's right. All right, so I have here a pragmatic approach to ethics. Pragmatism is all about the usefulness of things, and I want ethics to be useful to you. I want you to take something away from this class that you can use in your life. And what is ethics about? Ethics is about trying to figure out how to do the right thing, how to be a good person. What's the morally right thing to do, and what's the morally wrong thing to do? And what does it mean for the world to be a good place, right? Or what should our goals be? This is something we all struggle with. So what do we get from ethics? Well, my argument is that we get tools. We get tools that we can use to try to help us navigate these issues, these questions, make decisions in our life that hopefully will be the morally right decision. Okay, so what is an ethical argument? Right? So an argument is a persuasive act. Trying to persuade someone. Persuade who? Persuade about what? And is someone trying to persuade me, or are they trying to manipulate me? Am I getting paranoid here? You might be, right? Because when we hear the word persuasion and being persuaded, it feels like that sounds like someone's forcing us to do something. And that's immediately going to put us on the defensive, right? So my job here right now is to try to get you less defensive and more open to this word persuasion, that it's not all bad. And in philosophy, when we talk about persuasion, it's a very important act. All right, so let's move forward. So an ethical argument aims to persuade us about what is morally good or bad. Now, who's being persuaded? We might be trying to just persuade ourselves about what's morally right or morally wrong. Or we might be trying to persuade someone else. Or we just might be writing an essay and be trying to persuade anyone that's willing to listen. So most of the time, actually, we're trying to persuade ourselves of what is the morally right thing to do. Okay, so if we already know what's morally right or wrong, then we don't really need to convince ourselves of anything. We don't really need an argument. Ethics and ethical arguments exist because we aren't sure. We are not immediately certain of the answers to these moral questions. And since we're not sure, we need to be convinced of what is morally right or wrong. All right, so we need to be persuaded, we need to be convinced. Now here's the caveat. It should not be easy to convince us, right? Someone shouldn't be able to say anything and we just agree. So what does it mean for it not to be easy? Well, we should only be persuaded by good arguments. And sometimes we are persuaded by bad arguments, and that could cause trouble. So what makes a good argument? What makes an argument good? Unfortunately, we can't get into that right now. That's an entire class all by itself. And it usually comes up in logic and critical thinking classes. So you're going to need to take more philosophy classes to learn about what makes an argument a good one versus a bad one. And it's important because you need to protect yourself against bad arguments. It's not always easy to tell when you've come across a bad argument that should not convince you and shouldn't persuade you. Logic, right? I just used that word. That's an important word in philosophy. And logic's main concern is truth, how to reach a truthful conclusion or a likely true conclusion using reasonable steps in our thinking, and we call those steps inferences. The word logic comes to us from the ancient Greek. It's a strange word, logos. It's strange because it's the word for word. And also it has other meanings. It could mean to give an account. And that connects back to word, right? Because when you put things into words, right, then you try to make it understandable to yourself and others. You try to give an account. So it's about how language is tied to meaning, and that in order for things to be meaningful to us, we often have to be able to put it into language. Okay, so let's actually take a quick break. We are going to talk about smoking. So I'm going to show you an old commercial. And this is a commercial back from the 40s. And it was the first stop motion commercial from what I've read. And so when people saw this commercial, they were amazed. How is it possible that the cigarettes in the commercial were able to walk? And actually, they're going to dance.
Places all. All join hands, circle left. Now circle right and listen to me. LS, MFT. Alimentary corners like swinging on a gauge. To right to your honey with the right and left eight. Grand right and left around you go. Lucky strike means fine tobacco. Meet your honey and give her a whirl. All swing around with the little girls. Smoke 'em, then you'll see. LS, LS, MFT. Promenade and don't you fall. Promenade around the hall. Lucky Strike is first again with tobacco men. Promenade straight down the pike. It's time right now for a Lucky Strike. Yes, for smoking that you're bound to like, you just can't beat a Lucky Strike.
Okay, so that was Lucky Strike cigarettes, and from my research, you can't buy this brand anymore. Though it's possible you can still purchase cigarettes under this brand outside the U.S. It's no longer sold here. Okay, so the basic structure of an argument. We can break an argument into 3 parts. The first part is the premise, and a premise is any claim used as justification or evidence to support your conclusion, your final conclusion. Okay, that's important, right? That's all your support, your evidence. In philosophy, we call those your premises. Next, an inference, right? I just mentioned that word a couple moments ago. An inference is the reasoning that takes us from a premise or premises to a conclusion, right? Sometimes we call this part the thought process, or this is what we're doing when we're drawing a conclusion. So, 2 really important parts: the premises, right, our evidence, and then the thought process that we apply to our premises. And finally, the third part is the conclusion, right? This is the claim we're going to make that we're going to infer from our supporting evidence, our premises. Okay, so 3-part structure. Inferences, right? That's that reasoning, that thought process. Pretty complicated, but very interesting to study. There's many different kinds of inferences, and we're not going to get into that here. Right, we're gonna save that because you're gonna take another philosophy course. You're gonna take logic and critical thinking, and there you'll start to explore the different kinds of inferences, the different ways in which we reason. The premises. All right, so a premise was any claim used as justification or evidence to support our conclusion. And there are 2 fundamental types of premises. The first is called facts, and facts are confirmed claims about the world, right? Something that you're going to say, a statement about the world. The next fundamental type of premises are principles, and a principle, we could say, is a coherent rule about the world. So facts and principles are what we rely on the most when we're making arguments, and that's really important. That's the most important aspect of this video, is that facts and principles are the premises. That's what's going to support and be the evidence that we're going to use to draw conclusions. Now, there are also in the structure of the argument, the premises, we sometimes make transitory conclusions, right? These are conclusions we're going to make, but it's not our final conclusion, so it's a conclusion we're making along the way, in transit. We're not going to worry about that. Okay. Evaluating an argument. How do we judge, right? Critically evaluate an argument to see if it's a good one, if it's reasonable and logical. Well, the first thing we need to know is that we don't focus on the conclusion, right? Someone's trying to persuade us that the conclusion is true or likely true, but we don't really care about that. What we care about is whether or not the premises and the inferences work. If those work, right? If all the reasoning is good and all the premises, those facts and principles are good, then we should be persuaded to accept the conclusion. So we turn our focus when we're evaluating an argument to the premises and the inferences. If an argument is problematic, if there's something wrong with one of the premises or the reasoning, the inferences, that does not mean that the conclusion is wrong. It just means that we have not yet been reasonably persuaded to accept it. So that's an important distinction. Okay, we're moving pretty fast here. We're going to look at one more Lucky Strike commercial. And this came out at the same time. And there's no dancing here, but there is some marching.
Lucky Strike. First again with Tobacco Men. First again with Tobacco Men.
LSMFT, LSMFT.
Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
Yes, in a cigarette, it's the tobacco that counts. And Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
So round, so firm, so fully packed, so free and easy on the draw.
So for your own real deep down smoking enjoyment, smoke that smoke of fine tobacco, Lucky Strike.
Okay, well, there's a lot we could discuss about that little commercial. The suggestive language that's used, the round and firm Lucky Strike. We could also talk about some of the urban legends. If you go to the website Snopes, you'll find that Lucky Strike is there because there's this myth that the reason why it's called Lucky Strike is because randomly in packs of these cigarettes there would be a marijuana cigarette, and when you bought a Lucky Strike you'd see if you actually had a Lucky Strike in there. Snopes has found no evidence that this is actually true, though there are a lot of stories, people saying this. And the name Lucky Strike actually refers back to the gold rush and trying to strike gold. Okay, so we are going to focus on smoking in these series of videos, but not yet. First, we've got to figure out what an argument is. Okay, so good arguments, we said, need good inferences. In philosophy, the word we use is not good, but we say it's a valid inference. And if it's a bad one, we say it's an invalid inference. So there's lots of different, I said there's lots of different kinds of inferences, and you're going to have to take your logic and critical thinking class to really get into that. But let's move on to the premises. Again, philosophy has specific terms. They don't just say it's a good premise, they say it's sound. And you can say a sound premise or a sound argument. If you talk about a sound argument, that means that all the premises are true, right? So a good premise is one that is true. You don't want to make an argument based on any facts that are false or any principles, rules that actually don't hold, that are false also. So we need to be really careful when we make arguments and when we study arguments that nothing is false, that none of our premises are false. And in philosophy, there's a term contradiction, and we try to make sure there's no contradictions. To have a contradiction is to say that something both is and is not the case. And it's impossible for something to both be and not be at the same time. right? I cannot both be wearing glasses right now and not wearing glasses right now. That's a contradiction. And one of those is false, right? So if I have a contradiction in my premises, right? If I say both I am wearing glasses and I am not wearing glasses, if there's a contradiction like that, that means that one of those is false. That means I don't have a good argument. It's unsound. There's a false premise, in this case, a false fact. So we've got to be careful when we are putting together arguments that all the facts are true and that all the principles, none of them contradict each other. Okay. We're almost there. There's that famous argument from Aristotle that I actually talk about in the first week. So we're going for a full circle. So it's a really simple argument, and it just shows you, puts into practice what we've just been talking about. It only has two premises, and then it goes right to the final conclusion. And the first premise is a principle, right? The first premise of this argument is all humans are mortal, right? Now, if it was a fact, it would be about something specific about the world. But this is about all humans, not just right now, but in the past, in the future. It's a rule. All humans are mortal. And in ancient Greece, first the gods were defined, and the gods were defined as being immortal, and humans were not gods. So to distinguish humans from the gods, humans were defined as mortal, as not a being, an entity that could live forever, but one that had a finite lifespan, at some point would die. Okay, so that is the first premise of Aristotle's argument. The second one, this is a principle. The second one is a fact. And it's about something specific. It says there's a person, Socrates, and Socrates is a human. Right, there's the fact. Okay, we can put both of those premises side by side. Right, all humans are mortal, and Socrates is a human, and we can draw a conclusion. So here's our conclusion. Socrates is mortal. Right? And this actually is a very strong conclusion. We might say it's logically necessary, that this is the only conclusion we could draw from those two premises. Right? That all humans are mortal and that Socrates is immortal. That if those two claims are true, we're going to use reasoning to infer that Socrates is mortal. Now, this is not something that I knew beforehand, right? I don't know that Socrates will die. I can't see into the future. But from this argument, if I accept that the premises are true, that all humans are mortal, and that Socrates is a human, then and this reasoning is actually solid, right? This is valid reasoning. Then I must be convinced, persuaded, that Socrates is mortal, that Socrates will die at some point. Okay, so what is the takeaway here? The takeaway is that to make a good argument, we need to rely on facts and principles. So we need to be factual, right? We need to base our beliefs, our conclusions about what is morally right and wrong on facts that are true. And this takes research, right? We have to go out and find these facts. We have to find credible and reliable information to support our arguments. And number two, we need to be principled. We shouldn't be haphazard in our thinking. We won't be convincing anyone if we keep changing our mind about how things work, right? So we can't just say one moment, one thing and then the opposite the next, right? Our principles must be consistent, and there must be no contradictions where one of them would then have to be false. Okay, that is part one. We're going to come back for part two, and we're gonna step further deeper into ethics.